to the Halo mini-series, Episode 2, Creating a Sustainable Culture of DEI, featuring Jay Graves, CEO at Pathfinder Business Consultants. My name is Douglas Brown, CEO at Halo Consulting, a certified minority-owned executive search firm based in Chicago. If you're brand new here, Halo hosts monthly virtual roundtable events that touch on trending topics in the HR, tech, and DEI space. And don't forget to check out the Halo series, where we hear from executives in an intimate one-on-one setting, discussing what is keeping them up at night in this ever-changing landscape. Can't get enough? Hit that like and subscribe button and enroll in our monthly newsletter, which recaps current market trends and past events we have hosted. The link can be found in the description below. Jay, we're glad to have you back, and we're super pumped to continue the conversation around what is keeping you up at night.
Oh, thank you. And I'm happy to be back. Another big crowd.
Another big crowd. Jay, before we get started, our viewers need an update. Did your packages arrive before the holidays?
Oh, yes. Thank goodness they did. As I think I mentioned before, my wife's birthday is on the 27th of December. And so I'm not allowed to combine Christmas with her birthday. And got a little close there. I was getting a little nervous, but they came just in time. And, I have a happy wife. So all's well.
Awesome. That's great that your wife is happy. Happy wife, happy life. And we want to give a shout out to our returning viewers. And today we'll be discussing the first 3 steps in the DEI program development process, covered in episode 1. And in this episode, we'll be taking a deeper dive into governance, assessment, and strategy. In our first episode, Jay, you touch on organizations spending a lot of time and resources and energy around their overall corporate business development strategy. And with that emphasis on the corporate business development strategy, there may be a lack of connection between the two. And if done properly and correct and focused on the people strategy buckets and is properly resourced, ultimately you'll have better results across the board.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And an important thing to focus on as a filter: diversity, equity, and inclusion. You'll make sure your company culture is inclusive, your team culture is inclusive, and that people feel like they belong and they rally behind the mission and purpose. Jay, any context you'd like to add going into today's discussion?
No, I think you nailed it. And what I'm really excited about today is to be able to share with the audience how to really take this people strategy, particularly in the diversity space, and put it into action.
Awesome. We're excited to jump in. So before we get started, we'd like to provide a quick recap from our first episode, where we discussed each stage in the DEI program development process. This process was created by Jay and his team and has been implemented across many organizations around the globe. Of the first 3 steps we'll be discussing today, Jay, why is governance a critical starting point to the DEI program development process?
Yeah, I mean, this is the foundation. When I think of governance, it's the absolute paramount that you start here. And the reason being is this is going to be the guiding team that's going to, really make sure that your strategy and everything that you're doing following this stays on track, stays accountable, and really brings things to life. And I kind of liken it to, if you're going to build a house, if you're going to build a structure, you need to have a really strong foundation. You need to have strong cornerstones. And so, this is that foundation.
Yeah, and as the foundation of governance, playing a critical role in setting the stage of jump-starting the DEI roadmap, Jay, can you outline the key aspects that need to be aligned in order to progress throughout each step?
Absolutely. So one of the first things that we do when we talk about governance is establishing that DEI Steering Committee. First and foremost, that's really critical. And it's important that you have the right people on that committee. You need to have individuals who have authority, who have access to resources, have a voice in the organization. So a lot of times this will be people from, individuals from the executive committees or the C-suite. Particularly you'll have people from HR. So you want, learning and development, you want to have the right people on this steering committee. I do recommend keeping them relatively small. So maybe 5 or 6 people at the most. If you get too many people in there, then you can start to get too many voices and you can get bogged down. But if you have a well-rounded and diverse DEI steering committee, then it really sets that proper foundation. And I'll just kind of go through the bullets here on this slide. But what we do is we start with a charter to guide this particular process. And I have an example that I wanted to share with everybody so they can kind of see, how we do it, and maybe some best practices they can do. We really want to make sure that charter, we focus on that structure, again, making sure that we have the right people on that team. I've seen, different scenarios, one where you have, some executive presence on there, and, you have the right people on the team with the right amount of authority and voice. And I've seen some where they kind of punt it to, different parts of the organization that maybe don't have the voice, or they don't have the access that they need to have across the organization to really make things happen. And so as we're looking at structure, we want to make sure that while maybe those individuals, on that end of the spectrum, maybe there's a couple of those that you do want on the team, you need to make sure that you have the right structure on that team. Otherwise, it can really derail things. And commonly what I'll hear from those that don't have the right structure in place is, well, we made it this far and now we don't really know what to do. Nothing's happening. Now people are very frustrated in the organization. And it all went back to the fact that, the governance wasn't put together well. For the mission and vision, really, I almost, say this is your purpose, right? And so when we walk through this, one of the first exercises I do with the team is to ask, why are we here as individuals? As a steering committee, I go around the room and I say, why are you here? Why is this important to you personally, professionally, as an organization? And it's always wonderful to hear people's stories. It gets people opening up about their, authentic selves. A lot of times in those conversations, even with teams that have been together for a long time, and executive teams maybe that have been together a long time, they'll share something that they've never shared before. And I'll point to that as that the ability to be your authentic self in that situation, to be sitting at that table together as colleagues and be able to share these nuances of each other, and how it really enhances how you see each other. And through that conversation, now we want to take that to the organization, right? So it's a great learning moment, but it also nails down the why. You need to have a very, very strong why in this particular area, because there's a lot of opinions out there, right? And we are talking about people, and we're talking about behavior change. And so you want to make sure that your why and your purpose, that it's strong and you believe in it, because there's going to be tough times, there's going to be challenges, and you need to be able to jump back to that, mission, vision, and purpose. The other part of the process that we do in governance is we'll do initial goals, and I'll get, further in the flow of things, but this is a living, breathing document when I create it with my clients, particularly when we get to this area. We'll have some initial goals that we might think of, just observations. What are some observations you've had? I'll go around the room and I'll say, from your perspective, what are the areas that are going well for diversity? What are the areas that are not going well? And then, kind of through that, we'll start to find some themes, and we'll just kind of put those as initial goals. Well, maybe we want to influence these particular areas. And then we'll talk about, sometimes there's, in the DEI space, there's soft metrics, there's hard metrics, soft metrics being, maybe around how people feel, particularly around inclusiveness and belonging. The harder metrics are, might be, percentage of a particular group in, leadership, or a particular department or something like that. So we won't necessarily get that granular, because we may not have that information yet, and we haven't taken the second really important step yet to inform that. But we do want to start to get, I like to have their thought process to start to think around, what are the goals? What are some of the things that we want to do, so that when we come back and we add to that, we're not starting from scratch. And people, a lot of times in this area, where I think is really important, is a lot of people get hung up in metrics. And I like to try to break that, because a lot of individuals that I talk to, particularly, those of us who've been at the executive level, right? We're very data driven. We're used to, having a lot of data informed decisions that we have, and sometimes you don't have that. I want to get them comfortable with the fact that when you're dealing with people, sometimes you're talking about feedback and gut feel, and so that tends to be a conversation that we have in this place, and I want them to get comfortable with that. So all these are kind of high level what we do when we go through the governance building stage, and we really rely on, that charter, that document to guide those conversations.
And Jay, from your experience, whom is typically appointed as a part of the DEI steering committee?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, the ones that I've seen to be the most successful, what I really push for is, the CEO, or, if you don't have a CEO, president, whatever that title is of that top person, the person who really guides the entire organization. Having that individual on there, having that individual passionate, really sends a message through the organization, because, like I said, you're talking about behavior change. And so people are going to push back. There are going to be some people that will see this as a negative. They're going to, be a lot of different feelings, right? As you roll these programs out. And so, having that person from the top, with that persistency, with that perseverance, with that passion, and with the vision and purpose behind them, really sends a strong message across the organization, saying that this is meaningful for me, and it's meaningful to me as a leader of this organization. After that, it's really good to have, an operational person, whether that be a COO, or, somebody who is looped into, sort of the structural operations of the organization, because a lot of times we'll talk about supplier diversity, and we'll talk about, strategies to enhance your supplier diversity, things like that. So they need to have, we need to have some influence there. HR, definitely, right? I mean, they're the go-to people for your employee strategy, really, in your organization. So it's nice to have somebody from that team. Learning and development is really good as well to have on that core team. So and then I like to have individuals. You may have them amongst that team, but sometimes it's nice to have, somebody who has enough, you know, I don't want to say authority in an organization, but access in an organization, the
Mm-hmm.
ear of the top individuals. Maybe it's a sales director, or, somebody from, marketing director, or something, manager, but they're a change agent, and there's somebody who's been passionate in talking about this. Sometimes it's really nice to have that person on there, because they make wonderful accountability partners and links back to the employee base. So ideally, that's kind of the mix that I like to look for, but each company is different. Each company is structured differently. And so what I really try to look for is who has the voice that can really carry this forward, and how do we get them surrounded by individuals who are going to help them, um, you know, persevere and take that journey, and be able to support them throughout the journey.
Really appreciate that context, Jay. And when you were walking through the bullet point establishing a DEI steering committee, I know you mentioned that you don't want to necessarily have too many cooks in the kitchen. And from the context you just shared, you mentioned a number of individuals: the CEO, COO, someone from HR, someone from L&D, someone that could be a change agent, or an accountability partner.
Mhm.
If you had to really narrow in on, 3 to 5 individuals, where would you start if you were really, creating and establishing this team from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I like to see committees around five, maybe no more than six individuals. And so I would start within those areas of, senior leadership, HR, and operations are the ones that um, I would really focus on. Now, some organizations may have people who are in charge of culture, culture and purpose. We've worked. You and I have worked with a company, right, that has a very, very strong purpose and culture, and they have an individual who is in charge of that. And the
Mm-hmm.
day to day, that's actually my contact day to day. In that particular situation, because this really falls under that people change purview. So, that might be another, if you have that might be another person that I would certainly want on there, because you're talking about people. But I would definitely stick to those three buckets of, executive HR and operations, as your key foundation.
That's really helpful for our audience, Jay. Do you have examples that you can share that worked well, while others may have not, so the team had to pivot in terms of the governance step?
Yeah, yeah. I know I was kind of alluding to it before, where, I've had steering committees. Sometimes they're already in place. Sometimes we need to form them, where they've done a really good job of having those right individuals at the table. And when I really reflect back to those situations, we were able to move with a lot faster, and with purpose. And we were able to get through some of those really uncomfortable challenges. You know, when you talk about changing policy, or, you know, chasing a metric, you know, putting a metric out there and being bold about that metric, and then requiring the behavior change that you need to get to that metric. You know, that's when you sometimes are going to start to face those headwinds. And consistently, when I've seen those strong steering committees put together, they've been able to face those, and we make quick decisions. We're very thoughtful. We think through the pros and the cons quickly. But then by having those decision makers and individuals with the authority and with that voice, you know, HR being able to speak up from their perspective, the CEO or president speaking from theirs, the operation person saying this is what this means from the structure of the organization. You know, all those people being able to sit in one room at one time, we can make fast decisions and we can keep moving forward. When I've seen the opposite of that, where, you know, maybe typically what I think in this scenario, what I'll see is, you know, maybe at the high up, you know, executive levels, they say, you know, diversity is important. We need to start focusing on that in the organization. You know, so and so down in HR, this is going to be your project now. And they may try to put together a steering committee. And actually, I was talking to somebody about a couple of days ago, actually just right after the holidays, who was put into this situation. And they didn't really have a DEI background, not one that wasn't very deep, but they were very passionate about it. And that's why they were tapped, and they happened to be in HR. And they surrounded themselves with other individuals from HR because that's what they knew. You know, they were like, okay, well, let's get a team together, and it's going to be, you know, people from different parts of my own department in HR. And the reason why they called me is because they were getting very, very frustrated because they had tried to put out their strategy. They had tried to, you know, do a roadmap, and then they went to the executive team, and the executive team kind of shot it down. And then they went back and did some work, and the executive team shot it down. And I asked, like, you know, what are the things that they're shooting down? And it was the uncomfortable areas of behavior change, but it was those critical behaviors of behavior change that you have to do. And so, you know, unfortunately, I mean, my recommendation is that they have to get that executive on that steering committee, and they need to broaden their steering committee to include the right elements of it. You know, certainly I volunteered to reach out to that president and kind of maybe have him understand why it's so critical and so important. Unfortunately, in that situation, from what I've seen, is they're going to get really frustrated. They'll probably do some classes, and that'll be it. And that's not really a program. If anything, that's going to backfire most likely with your employees who are really passionate about DE&I, because they're going to think you're just checking the box, and that's going to deflate the organization versus doing good. Sometimes, I hate to say this, but sometimes I tell people, if you're not willing to go all the way and be purposeful about this, then don't even go, because it's actually going to be a negative experience for your employees versus just the way you're doing things today. If you do things that look like it's check the box or tokenism, or, you know, anything kind of in that realm, that has a really negative impact. So unfortunately, I think they're going to be in that situation if they're not able to get that executive team put together.
Yeah, thanks for that context, Jay, and for sharing both of those examples from both ends of the spectrum. And for those executives watching, the diversity, equity, and inclusion process development is definitely not a sprint. It's a journey, and it's an ongoing journey. And I know that's something that Jay has mentioned a couple of times today and in episode 1. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, very much so.
All right, so after the DEI Steering Committee and other aspects are established, can you walk us through your LMS platform and how it's beneficial to you and your clients?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, this is just an example of what we've put together and what we use to help guide our clients. And, you know, the example that I use here is for putting together the steering committee. So, you know, we this is something that we've got a soft launch now. We've got a couple people that are in the back end that are, you know, going through and making sure all the kinks are out. But, you know, we're getting ready to do a really broad launch on this. And the reason being is because in the past, you know, this typically was, you know, something that we did just in Excel or Word. We use the same format. But what I found is that it's much easier to take people through a linear process. And so that's what you see here. And so, you know, what you don't see here are their videos, and there's other content above this. But when you get down to this area where I call them course documents, because this is something that we're going to offer either clients or we're going to be able to do courses with. But say this was a client, then we would bring them down here. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to click on the DEI Steering Committee charter, because like I said, that's something that guides you through it. Great thing I like about this is it's interactive. The client actually owns it. So once I give them access into the system, it's theirs forever. And so as we make updates, or we add the Halo series to our forums and chats and things like that, they'll have access to that kind of continuing education and up-to-date information. But they'll also be able to go to their charter. And like I said, this is a living, breathing document. So things will change over time. Steering committees will change. We'll bring fresh views on at times. We'll change our goals. We'll change it. All these different areas of our focus. And so this is just an example of the start top part of the document, where we start to go through the different areas. Vision, purpose. That's where I said we do that exercise where we like to go around the room. And then ultimately from that, we really synthesize, one purpose for the organization and the why, and so on and so forth. And so we really just use this as a guide to kind of go through things with our clients. And, as we get to the bottom part, that's where we start to add in, goals. What are those initial goals? What are the deliverables that we need to do to accomplish those goals? Who's in charge is very important. Again, that's why it's great to have that strong governance, because you need to have accountability, for these particular areas, and somebody who, maybe they're not even doing like the day-to-day work on it, but they maybe have a team or something, but you need to have somebody that's in charge of it, right? So we can add our metrics and everything else, but this is the part where it starts getting really fluid on this particular piece, because it's important that we get to the next step. To come back, once we complete the next step of assessment, we need to come back to this, finalize things out, and then that really becomes, leads us to our roadmap.
And this brings us to our next slide, assessment. Assessment is the second step in the DEI program development process, and this tool is critical in establishing the company's DEI baseline. Jay, how does this tool allow you and your clients to establish critical benchmarks across diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and what key indicators are measured?
Yeah, I love this tool. We use a lot of different assessment tools when we first started. Everything from things that we built ourselves, and we had help from universities and thought leaders and everything else, and they're great. They're absolutely great. But what I found with this particular tool is it really gets into all of the different dimensions that you need to have at a much deeper level to really, really, truly be informed on what the employees and what your organization is saying around the topics of DE&I. And so, for this one in particular, in this example, you can see that you've got, 1,274 respondents. I think this was a company that was, around 2,500, 2,800 individuals. So, pretty good amount of people that are responding. We like to see, around that, 75, 80% response rate. That's really kind of sometimes best in class. We like to see that, but this is really close. And the interesting thing is, right to the right of where you can see the all respondents at the top left there is a little click down. And one of the things we're able to do with this tool is you're able to have like individual departments or individual teams. You're able to get all information all the way down to that level. And each one of those teams, for example, if we were to click on that and say hit, sales department, if you were to click on that, first thing you would see is their dashboard. This is the organization's rolled up dashboard. You would see their dashboard, and you would see everything associated with that particular department. And so you can just get really, really granular in this solution. It gives you this DEI score, which is, there's thousands of organizations' data that's behind this, right? And so it's started to normalize, what's a good score relative to other, industries, other similar industries, that you are, right? And so, this DEI score of 64, it shows it's green. Love it too, because it's something quick, it's visual that you can look at. It's green. It's kind of close though. I think if the score was 1 or 2 points lower, then we would actually be showing yellow. And so we're right on the border here with this particular client. And as you kind of go through that top bar, you start to see, okay, we know 8 areas of concern, right? So there are some things that we need to look at. The diversity, equity, and inclusion piece, in this particular example, they were doing pretty good in their diversity. They had a very diverse group, and when we looked at their metrics, I mean, they had people from all kinds of backgrounds, not just gender or ethnicity. I mean, they had different education, socioeconomic. I mean, it was a pretty diverse group already. And from an equity perspective, people felt pretty well treated. There was one small group, and you can see a little different color on that green there, and that's where that was highlighted. But inclusion was an area where they had the majority of their areas of concern. And then I thought what was interesting too is when we look on the belonging piece, 47% feel like they belong. That's great. But you have 17% that are actively saying they don't belong, don't feel like they belong in this organization. And somewhere in the middle, the rest of those percentages, right? And so that's a little scary when more than half your organization's either willing not to tell you, or maybe they're ambivalent to whether or not they belong or not, or they're saying, I just don't belong. That's a red flag because that can turn into turnover or unengaged, individuals. But for each one of these areas, if this was interactive, you'd be able to click on the diversity. It shows you, the exact areas where it's working well, where it's not working, so on and so forth. But the piece that we love the most is on the bottom right corner, and that's written comments. And the reason why we love this is because if people have taken the time to respond and write a comment, then we find that there's a lot of gold in those comments. Whether it be just, no, I think everything's great. We see some things there. But a lot of times, the people that have that opportunity to speak out for the first time, and they speak out. And so that's where, we really, like I said, find gold.
Thanks for that context, Jay, and this particular client. And that's a good segue into our next slide. Jay, can you touch on the importance of company survey results and how it can impact your company culture and bottom line?
Absolutely. So when we're talking about doing a survey, that is truly your employees' opportunity to hear back from you. So like I said, when we started the governance piece, we might put those initial goals down, but a lot of times those are going to be things that we just see. Now, Douglas, you and I, we've been at tops of organizations, and we know that when you get to the top of that pyramid, your visibility through those layers starts to diminish. And you have to rely on what you hear and see, and hopefully hear from individuals, and you find a way to stay connected. But you're still going to have filters, multiple levels of filters between you and the individual employees. And so, what's important is that we give them this opportunity to speak up, because a lot of times what I find is somebody will say, well, I think the problem is we don't have enough this, we don't have this, and we need people here, and we need to do social media. And it's like, we'll go back after doing surveys and say, here's a plethora of things that was not known, and it's not your fault, but this is what your employees are saying. And that's why it's important for to do these surveys, to be able to take a deep dive. And I like this example because this is actually from a client that we've had. And as you go through, it's not too terrible, right? In these comments, and this is an example too of like the kind of comments that we get. But one of the things that stuck out, too, was the comment around, have you faced any obstacles in your career progression or ability to facilitate fully in work processes that are not experienced by all of your other colleagues, right? And so this was actually an area where the company thought that they were doing very well. And what we found is, 14%, of this particular population was actually not feeling like they were doing very well here. And so what we found by clicking down, if you look at the bottom, is, women face different struggles in the workplace. This is one of the comments that we found, and we were actually able to find a whole thread around women in the workplace in this organization. And one of the things that's interesting about this is they thought they were doing really well because they had women in leadership, they had women in key, they had such a great focus on supporting women, but there's a population of women they weren't thinking about. And also during the transition of COVID, you know, unfortunately, a lot of women were impacted by caregiving and kids not being able to go to school. And a lot of that, you know, kind of traditional things, you know, fell on women. And so companies didn't adjust for that. And so that's kind of what we found here is that, you know, women who are caregivers, women who were very active in their communities. You know, this example here, due to the fact that I have a child with multiple disabilities, you know, again, going back to that caregiver, you know, there was just such a heavy thread through here of, yes, you're putting us in these positions and thank you so much, you're giving us these opportunities, but you're not really helping account for our work-life balance, and you're not really helping account, you know, for the dynamics of being a woman in the workplace. And so what this let us do is go back, add information from this survey to those goals, refine those goals, make them even better, make them more poignant, and this actually led to a policy change in that particular organization, and a quick one.
And Jay, how long after the survey was conducted was the policy implemented company wide?
You know, it actually didn't take fast, and I'm sorry, it didn't take too long. It was pretty fast. And the reason being is because we had the right people on the steering committee. Going back to that first conversation, we had the decision makers on that steering committee, and when they saw this, you know, there was a couple of women that were on that steering committee because they did a great job. They had women at the executive level, and they were like, you know what, we are past that point in our careers. We didn't even think about that, but we know the demographic of our organization is actually, you know, between early 20s and mid 30s. So you're talking about those prime caregiving and, you know, years with kids and everything else, right? So the group got together, talked about the policy change, and it was actually changed within a couple of weeks of the findings of here. And one of the things that we did was, and I'll get into this later on, I think it's in our next session, but we'll talk about the importance of the communication plan. When we rolled out the DEI strategy to the organization, we used this example specifically as a way to say, and here's something we heard, and here's the new policy change. And they use Teams. I don't know if I think we all use Teams at some point, right? And you can see all these hearts and all these clapping hands, all this stuff just coming across the screen because so many people, you know, really appreciated the fact that they got so detailed and made that policy change quickly. That is how you're going to get your momentum. That's how you're going to really launch a successful program when you can have that type of vigor behind your organization. And so that's where this was a huge win for them.
That's really great, Jay, and thanks for sharing that example. And throughout the DEI program development process as a whole, and I know we've only covered a couple of steps up to this point, but I think at its core, the establishing the DEI Steering Committee, it sounds like that is a core aspect and piece in order to be agile and pivot in a time of, you know, for example, this survey in particular. So, you know, this really gets back at, you know, having a core group of leaders and individuals, you know, might be a change agent. But again, what Jay had mentioned was, you know, having the CEO, someone from operations, HR, a change agent, L&D, et cetera, and having that team be small and agile enough to be able to come make decisions on things that are important to the company or organization as a whole. So really appreciate that context, Jay. And now that the steering committee, the DEI steering committee is informed and armed with robust data and metrics, what is your approach to developing a go-forward strategy?
All right. Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is quite frankly the really exciting time for me because we've synthesized all of this information. We've got the right people at the table, and this is where we start to lay out our roadmap. And so we'll call a session with the DEI Steering Committee. You know, if we find that there are departments that might be impacted or needed to support the strategy, we'll invite them, you know, to this kickoff. But typically, what we'll do is we'll present an executive summary of the survey results, and then we'll do initial recommendations on that, and then we'll bring them back for a formal road mapping session. And that's where we really synthesize everything. And so, in that session, we'll have our recommendations of where we think that we need to start. And sometimes, what's exciting, but also what can be scary for some companies is they may see 10, 12 areas that we want to focus on. But one of the things we remind them is, again, you said it, I've said it, this is a journey. So we may only accomplish 4 of these. So in this session, let's talk through each one of these particular areas. Let's add some, if there's something that maybe somebody else has picked up on, and prior to this meeting, right? But this is a really roll up the sleeves working session with that team. And we literally will start to build that roadmap. We'll prioritize the areas that we want to focus on. We'll start to build out the cadence. We'll create an action plan. We'll solidify metrics, so that is when you can go back to that document. And our strategy is actually part of the document. So you can just scroll up to that part where we have the action plans and the metrics and assignments, and that's when you can really update things. We also have a bucket for resourcing. That's where you can update, okay, this is going to require this much funding, this is going to require these departments, this is going to require these people, so on and so forth. And so that's what we start to work through and we start to build out as part of that process. The other thing that we like to look at is, if the organization doesn't already have employee resource groups for me become the heart and soul of a good DEI program. Reason being is because you've created this safe place for people to come together as communities, but you've also had people that aren't part of those communities who come to these ERGs to learn, to become allies, and they're so connected with their community. They're the ones that are going to bring you great ideas, to really bring life to your DEI strategy. So one of the things we'll start to look at are there particular groups that maybe spoke up in the survey or that we've heard before? Maybe it's our women, maybe it's our veterans, maybe whatever that is, early in career. And so what we'll do is we'll identify and we'll say, we want to start launching ERGs. Maybe these are the ones that we want to focus on first. You know, let's add that to our strategy. And so that's why I like to put that here, even though it is its own, it actually does its own thing, its own roadmap, and so on and so forth, and put an ERG together. We need to start the process here. And then I talk about that organizational communication plan. And that's where it's critical that we start to think through, okay, how are we going to announce this? Is this going to be at a town hall? Is it going to be in all hands? Is it going to be through our frontline leaders? Is it going to be from the top? So on and so forth. What are the words we want to say? And we start to put together that communication plan. And that really takes us to launching the program.
Yeah, before we get into launching the program, Jay, when you're putting together the road mapping session with the DEI Steering Committee, I know you mentioned that there might be 10 to 12 different areas of focus to prioritize, but you did highlight that there might be 4 critical areas to focus on. How do you and your team decide, where to focus your time and effort?
Yeah, so one of the things that we look at first when we're trying to prioritize things is creating filters. So, first and foremost, what would be the most detrimental piece to your people and to your business? And that's really just the broadest filter that we look at. If we don't solve this, it can have a critical impact on our people. It can have a critical impact on our business. And that's why going back to that first slide of connecting your business strategy to your people strategy is so important, and why it's so important that you spend so much time on your business strategy that you do the same when it comes to your people strategy. You have the best strategy in the world, and so that we kind of remind ourselves of that more in this session, because it's one of the filters. What could derail us if we don't address this and address it quickly? And then we kind of titrate through the list from there.
Really appreciate that context, Jay. And moving on to the strategy timeline
Yeah.
slide. So Jay, the strategy timeline slide, is a real life example that you've put into action and launched up to this point. Can you walk our audience and viewers through what this 3-month process looks like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is an example. Sometimes the timing can be different depending on the organization. Some will move faster. Some, this may be a 6-month uh, situation. Um, but this example here is in December. It's December. we started off with a steering committee survey, and we did our key findings. We did our executive debrief with them. This was early in December. We did our road mapping session with them about a week later, and then we just wrapped our launch communication plan because we're actually everybody's going to January 3rd for their organization. We are going to do our DEI leadership kickoff sessions, and that's part of the communication plan that we decided to do with this organization. There's a letter that's going to be coming from the president about the purpose and importance and the roadmap and the key findings. And so we're going to get with all the leaders in the organization. We're going to walk them through the key findings. We're going to walk them through the roadmap and the priorities. And then we're going to start to do to set them up to do some learning and development. And so at the end of January, beginning of February, we've blocked off a couple of weeks there where we're going to start to do unconscious bias training, but we're going to focus on training the leaders first, manager and up. We're also bringing in, we know that we have those high performing individual performers who have a lot of influence in an organization as change agents. We're going to bring them in as part of that as well. One of the things that's great about that is a lot of times they love recognition, right? They love the fact they know that they're important and critical for that organization. So from a leadership perspective, you're also motivating those individuals because you're including them, right? So we're going to focus on them, and then we're going to roll out unconscious bias as a foundation for our education series towards the end of the month, beginning of February. And in the meantime, through January and February, we are going to start to do some listening groups and some sensing sessions around ERGs. We're going to get a sense of what ERGs, we have a targeted list, but we're going to get a sense of, who would be interested, who might raise their hand to lead those. And so we're going to start to have these inclusion group sessions with individuals so that by the end of February, the plan is that we start to launch our first formal ERGs for the organization. And there's a whole timeline. I just truncated this piece, but we have other activities and cadences that we have mapped out for the months after February. But we want to get past this foundational piece first before we start to crawl faster and start to get to the walk phase in the back half of the year.
And Jay, it really sounds like the first 3 months is the critical foundation that needs to be laid. Once this three-month strategy timeframe is completed, what steps follow after the ERG launch and beyond?
Yeah, from there, it's really getting down deeper into the organization. So a lot more of the learning and development, which I know we'll get into, I think in our next session. So you're starting to get into the individual training. You're starting to launch the ERGs. And I gotta say, so the ERG uh, formation and everything else is actually a very similar version to the DEI Steering Committee process. So, they've got their own, ramp up time, right? A couple, maybe a month or two, depending on, the organization and how many people we have and, so on and so forth. So, it's really getting into that action phase, getting those ERGs launched, getting the education out there, hearing back from the organization, starting to engage the community, starting to change policies, enact new policies, and really you're getting down to um, taking action to the action plan that you built out, knocking down those priorities. And as one knocks down, the conversation that we have is to say, okay, do we feel like we're at that point where we made this policy change, right? That was one of our top priorities. It's gone great. Do we want to replace that with something now, or is our bandwidth where it needs to be this year as part of the journey? And so we have those conversations of constantly evolving, and that's why that's the last step of the journey or the
Great.
process, I should say.
We're really excited for everyone to tune in to our last episode. And Jay, really appreciate your time today covering the first 3 steps in the DEI program development process: governance, assessment, and strategy. Before we wrap up here, Jay, in order for organizations to continue building on their DEI foundation versus having a company-wide checklist, where should executives turn if they've hit a ceiling?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, that's where we often find individuals that come to us is they've tried something or they've gotten, only so far. Maybe they've had grassroots and they're no longer making progress, or it might be spanning into that place where it's actually starting to do more damage than good. And so that's where a lot of times, people will reach out to me, or individuals who do DEI consultants like myself, because you know we bring that knowledge, the best practices, the processes, and the structure. And a lot of times, I'll get feedback of like, you've really been such a lifeline. And for me, it's just because, well, I bring all of these to the table. I've seen it so many times. I've enacted it so many times. And also for my own personal background, people I tend to connect with leaders because I was an executive who, you know with other individuals and change agents in an organization, took a grassroots program and really turned it into a world class program for our employer. And we learned so much through that. But I was an executive that had to make sure that I was thinking about people change and thinking about all that and making mistakes. And we didn't call consultants at first, and until we did get the consultants in, that's when we really started making traction, because they brought that formal structure to us. So I think that that's where it's important, again, investing in your people strategy. Yes, that's going to cost you money. You bring in McKinsey's and other consultants to work on your business strategy. You need to do the same when it comes to your people strategy, because what are you going to do with that strategy if your people fall apart? So invest that time, bring in the experts, because we can help you move fast, we can help you move safely, and we can really help you deliver those results earlier.
Thanks for that context. And for anyone looking to connect with Jay, feel free to scan his QR code, which will be directed to his LinkedIn profile. And just want to give a special thanks to our audience for tuning in to episode 2 of our Halo mini-series, Creating a Sustainable Culture of DEI. Hit that like and subscribe button and enroll in our monthly Halo newsletter, which recaps current market trends and past events we have hosted, which can be found in the description below. And don't forget to tune into our final and last episode, where we will touch on the last 4 steps in the DEI program development process. And Jay, thanks again for joining us, and wishing you and your family a happy new year and much success in 2023.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, and I'm really enjoying the series. Thank you for bringing this to light and doing this for the community.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay. We'll talk soon.
All right.